Hello and welcome to the Tough Agers podcast. I'm Deborah Rothschild, the owner of Tough Agers LLC, a virtual and on location fitness company that specializes in working with older adults.
I took off riding around Germany and stayed at the youth hostels, which was a great deal of fun. I learned a lot about sleeping on straw that had a very thin sheet over it. It's really fine if you're tired, it doesn't matter.
In the Tough Agers Season 1, Episode 1 podcast, you were introduced to 87-year-old Kirby Miller. Now, let's take a deeper dive into the fascinating life of this inspiring, active older adult. Welcome back, Kirby.
Hi.
Hi again. So you mentioned the sports you were involved in while you were in college. How did you stay active during the summers?
Several ways. I took summer jobs my freshman year, and it was about 2 miles from where my folks lived at that time. And I worked at a place where I got off at 3:00, and instead of waiting for my dad to get off at 5 and take me home, I thought, well, I'd just walk home. And so I started walking home every day, but walking is pretty boring, and I was young and energetic in those days, and so I started jogging. And the first thing you know, I started in jogging faster and enjoying it more. And I started keeping track of the time, how long it took me to get home. And it turned out I could go pretty fast by the end of the summer. That was one of the things I did. Another thing was a couple summers, I think my junior and sophomore years, I was on a showboat. The college I went to provided a crew for a showboat on the up and down the Ohio River. That was the only place the captain had a license. So we put on shows pretty regularly, almost every night, from Pittsburgh down to Cincinnati in those 2 years. And I wasn't much of an actor, but I was a trombone player, so that's how I got on. And I was in charge of the music the second year. Anyway, after the show is over, everybody has been tense for trying to get the show going and make sure it was successful. And so to blow off steam afterwards, I would go take off running. That was the thing that at that time that I did a lot of. And it was sort of fun. I don't know any of these little towns that we played, even the big ones. And I would just take off running, and pretty soon, several times, I'd discover I'm not sure how to get back. It was dark, of course. The show was over at like 10:00. And so this was between 10 and 11. And so I would have to find somebody that I could say, well, do you know where the showboat is? There was one place where I did that, and I found a fire station and asked them. And 2 nights later, we were still playing that town, and I ran again, and I got lost again, and I ran to the same fire station. That was really embarrassing. But that was the second, third. The fourth year I was in college, I went to Germany with a group that had a 7-week course there where we could study at the University of Freiburg. And at the end of the semester, since I was in Germany, I thought, I ought to stay here and look around. So we had a really good friend in Germany at that time, and I wrote a letter to him and told him I'd like to stay around. And he said, well, I'll send you a bicycle if you want a bike. So I rode my bicycle to his mother's house, which is a couple hundred miles away. Well, maybe not 150, I think. Anyway, and then they rested me for a few days, and I took off riding around Germany and stayed at the youth hostels, which was a great deal of fun. I learned a lot about sleeping on straw that had a very thin sheet over it. It's really fine if you're tired. It doesn't matter. I couldn't speak the language too well. I mean, this was my third year German course, but I could get along. So it wasn't bad. In fact, it was a great deal of fun. I had to buy my own food, and I just go beside the road and eat my food when I got hungry, and that worked really well. So that's how I stayed in shape during my summers. I was quite busy.
Wow, it sounds like you had quite a few adventures.
I did. I was very fortunate to have parents that could at least send me over there. I mean, and this was time I would be working normally, and so I got a chance to see a little bit more of the world at a young age, and at the same time stay in really great shape.
That's great, Kirby. Now, last time you mentioned a bike trip that you went on cross country. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I had some friends that they lived in the same town I did, and they rode about 20 miles each way to work every day in the South Bay Area where I live. I was in pretty good shape, but I wasn't riding like that every day. I didn't, even though my workplace was closer than that, I didn't try to ride my bike there. But one of them organized a trip. He wanted to ride across the country. And another one happened to be employed by USGS, the Geological Survey, and he was in charge of the map division. So we had a chance to get maps of the entire United States, and we planned a trip going from Oregon to Boston, Massachusetts. And it turned out we started in the last week in May, and it ended up in the second week in August. It's a 75-day trip.
Wow.
We averaged 61 miles a day. We stayed in tents whenever it was a nice place, and otherwise we stayed at motels. But by the time I was through, I had lost a fair amount of weight. I was down about 10 pounds from where I had been, and I felt great. Of course, I found out that I could eat more than one milkshake a day, and it didn't seem to bother me at all. I ended up some days having 3 milkshakes, but I didn't gain weight. It was a great deal of fun. And one of the members actually wrote a book about that. It's called "We Went This Way," and it's still available, but I think it's out of print now. So I have copies for my kids and maybe my grandkids.
That's wonderful. So were you sore at first from those long rides?
Yeah, I was a little bit sore. I mean, I was in good shape, but not for riding bikes every day like that.
Right.
It took a while, and actually I had a couple falls. You think that somebody who'd been riding a bicycle since he started throwing papers at the age of 8 would be able to handle a bike all the time, but it turns out that when you're riding a long way, there's a long time, and one time I saw a sign that said, "Watch out for falling rock," and I was ahead of the other guys a little bit, a couple of 100 yards, and sure enough, I while looking up the sign, I got off the road a little bit. It was a nice dirt pavement over there, and I realized that there was a big rock. One of those fallen rocks was out on the side of the road where I was headed. So I had to ditch the bike before I hit the rock, and I did that and landed on my left shoulder, which still bothers me today. Actually, it's one of the few things that one of the things I've learned over the many years is every time you injure yourself, it shows up later. And you're surprised when it does, but yeah, it's the same old thing. But I do exercises for that particular arm now on a regular basis. But that was a great trip. We arrived in Boston, like I said, 75 days later, and it was really a very enjoyable time. We saw lots of sites. We stopped at every single historic monument on the way because one of the guys was really interested in history. And that book that he wrote about the trip has whole portions of it about the history that we saw.
Wow. Can you share some of the places you stopped off at?
Well, we started in Astoria, and we went straight across the Rockies from there. We went through the lower part of Michigan because my wife's parents lived in northern Michigan, and so we took a side trip up to their house and stayed there for a night or two before getting back to the same place on the road and continuing. We had a van to go along with us because one of the wives drove the van, and the other two wives got in the van occasionally whenever they had a chance. Let's see, the other places, we found the roads were pretty good in most states, but there were certain states where they were terrible. Michigan was the worst of all the states. They didn't have any place for bicycles on the side of the road in a lot of places, and the roads themselves were really bad. So we learned what states had good roads and where they were well kept. It made a big difference. The other thing we learned is if you're bothered by mosquitoes, all you have to be driving is about 9 miles an hour and they won't bother you.
Wow, that's very interesting.
9 miles or faster. Another thing any other bicycle rider knows is that the most important thing is the wind. Even if you're on flat ground, which we weren't most of the time, if the wind's against you, you have to work really hard.
Right. Did you have any of you have any problems with your bikes?
Oh yeah. One of the falls that I had, it actually broke the tire. My front tire was in the shape of a figure 8 by the time we looked at it carefully. So I had to get a new wheel, which fortunately there was a town not too far away that had that, and we had the van so we could work it out overnight. So it didn't cause a problem. Flats were one of the guys had a fair number of flats because he insisted on riding close to the middle of the road more than the rest of us did. But there was nothing other than those incidents that I mentioned that are really earth-shaking. When we started the trip at Astoria, we put our back wheels in the water. When we got to Boston, we put our front wheels in the water and had pictures taken at both places.
Oh, that's great. Any other stories from that adventure you'd like to share?
Well, I visited a lot of people that had been in my past that just happened to be living close to the path that we decided to take. And so it was really nice. I got to see one of the girls that I had a crush on in elementary school who lived in Montana at the time, or Idaho at the time. Let's see, I had my wife's first cousin lived in Iowa in a town where we stopped and we stayed at their house, actually. So that was pretty neat. They lived in the town where the Music Man was supposedly about. And of course, the library, I had to go to the library to see Marion at the library there. But that was pretty neat. We just saw a lot of neat things on that trip.
Wow, that's so great that you did that. Yes. So you had mentioned to me that you have some tips as far as how to incorporate some stretching into your daily routine, because we all
Yeah,
know stretching is so important.
yeah. I went to one seminar about keeping in shape for older people one time, and the guy said, subtract your age from 100, and the difference, what's left, is how much you should weight train. The rest of it should be stretching. So, I should be like stretching 87%. In other words, your age is the amount of percent that you should be stretching in your workouts. I don't think that's probably accurate, but it was an interesting point. But I do think it's fun to stretch, and a good thing to do whenever you think about it, actually. One of the things I found out is that when I'm brushing my teeth in the morning and the evening, it adds up to about 6 minutes of brushing. And rather than waste that 6 minutes and just cleaning my teeth, I found that if I put my weight on my left elbow, I can stretch my ankles, my calves, and my hip sequentially. I have a pattern of doing it. 4 different stretches for the 4 different parts of brushing your teeth. And it's very easy to do, but it just feels good to stretch those little joints out and actually strengthen the muscles a little bit too. When you're standing in line at I don't know, a bank or at a health clinic or whatever, if you just have to stand in line, no sense in just standing there. You can raise up on your toes and see how long you can keep your balance that way. And if you try it, 10 seconds and then rest, and then 10 seconds again. It doesn't hurt anybody else, and it does feel good to get those muscles working. You can do the same thing by standing on 2 feet and then lifting 1 foot slightly while you're standing there and keeping your balance, and then see how far you can count before you have to put your foot down. There are a lot of things like that if you just think about, well, here I'm wasting my time just sitting doing nothing really important, you can actually use some muscle or some joint that needs to be loosened or strengthened. So that's the kind of thinking I have in mind.
That's great advice. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today.
I'm happy to do it.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tough Agers podcast. For more information, you can check out my websites, DeborahDoesFitness.com and ToughAgers.com. Take care.